This is the Ramana Maharshi 40 Verses on Reality Satsang, a time for self-reflection and self-inquiry. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. Welcome. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I have been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice. I bring this to this satsang. This week's reading on 40 Verses from Reality is verse 7. These are Ramana's words. Although the world and knowledge thereof rise and set together, it is by knowledge alone that the world is made apparent. That perfection wherein the world and knowledge thereof rise and set, and which shines without rising and setting, is alone the reality. There, all things come and go. Something knows all these transitory things. There is something within you that always knows and is the same now as in your earliest memory. What is this? Ramana Maharshi says that things that come and go are not important. What is most important does not come and go. You can find this within yourself right now by asking, what knows? Or who knows? Are you ever separate from this knower? The sense of reality is there in each waking moment, and in last night's dream, too. Trace out, where does this sense of reality come from when you're awake? How about when you're dreaming? Who knows this seeming reality? Now, a practice note. If you inquire and ask yourself, do I exist? The same answer will come no matter how many times you ask. You must exist. Otherwise, you couldn't ask that question. You exist, and you know that you exist. What is this existence? The sun rises and sets. Do you? Now to our videos for the week. First is Swami Sarvapriyananda, and his talk is Consciousness Beautifully Explained in 200 seconds.
It is consciousness. Chaitanyam. The word is Chaitanyam in Sanskrit or Chit. Chaitanyam, Chit, these are the words used. And what he says is, there is a consciousness in you. This is Chaitanyam. And you have a mind, and you have a body, this consciousness shines in the mind, and through that in the body, in all the organs of the body, and you feel this consciousness. This is the answer. Now the answer here is, the thing to be noted here is, the teacher presents consciousness in 5 aspects. There's 5 points you have to understand, appreciate. First of all, consciousness is not a part of your body or your mind. Consciousness is not a part of your body or your mind. It is apart from your body and mind. Here it's different from science, because modern science would say consciousness is a product of your body. Even your mind is a product of your body. Mind and consciousness all are products of the brain. That's what physiology would say today. But here the teacher says consciousness is apart from your mind and body. First point, it is not a part of your body. It's not a product of your body. Second point, it's apart, but it pervades and illumines the mind and body. Consciousness pervades and illumines the mind and body, enabling it to function. Third point, this consciousness is not limited by the mind and body. It exists apart from the mind and body also. It's not limited to it. It's not something here in this particular brain, in this part of the body. It's not limited by the body. Third, this consciousness is known, it is known in the functioning of the mind and body. Through the functioning of the mind and body, we can know consciousness, we can experience consciousness. And fifth, the last point to be appreciated is, without the mind and body, consciousness is still there, but it cannot be known. It's not experienced. Example, 5 points. I'll give you an example. There is light here from the tube light, there is light here. Here is my hand. And light is being reflected from this hand. Okay, it's being reflected from this hand. The light which is being reflected from this hand, you can see here, the light being reflected from this hand, the light is not a part of this hand. It's not a product of this hand. Okay, first point. The second point is, it pervades the hand and illumines the hand. Third point is, I can understand the light. A third point is, it exists, it's not limited by the hand. Other than the hand also, it exists everywhere. And the fourth point is, it's by the reflection in this hand that I can understand the light. Just now here I cannot understand the light. But when I put my hand here and it shines, I can understand the light. I can experience the light when it is reflected. And the last point, very interesting, is if I remove the hand, the light is still there, but it's not experienced. Now it is experienced. Now it is not experienced.
That was very interesting. Now let us listen to Rupert Spira. He talks about shining as the simple knowledge I am.
On these rare occasions where there is an abrupt, radical recognition of our essential nature, the reason, in fact the only reason why it is difficult to integrate this recognition in our everyday experience is for lack of proper guidance. There is absolutely nothing that is incompatible about the recognition of our essential being and leading a fully functional, relational life. If it seems that there is an incompatibility between these two, the recognition of our essential nature and leading a fully integrated life, it is simply because we have not yet explored or had the help in exploring how these two fit together. The recognition of our true nature is so often described in the literature as some marvelous, exotic, extraordinary experience that happens to 1 in a million enlightened people. The recognition of our true nature is simply the recognition of what we refer to when we say, I am. Each of us, all day long, we are making statements about ourselves. I am tired. I am hungry. I am lonely. I am married. I am 34 years old. I am sick, etc., etc., etc. In each of these cases, there is a basic I am that is subsequently qualified by various feelings, activities, states, relationships, etc. All that is necessary is to see the nature of that to which we refer when we say, I am, before it has been qualified or conditioned by experience. There is nothing extraordinary or exotic about that recognition. In fact, even the taste of tea is exotic compared to the knowing of our own being. The knowing of our own being is the simplest, the most obvious, the most intimate experience there is, and no one has privileged access to it. The reason why some people seem to see or know more clearly than others their true nature is that they have not allowed their essential being to be colored and therefore obscured by experience. In other words, when most people feel, I am depressed, the I am part of the experience is obscured by the depression. The depression is what we experience. But some people, even in the midst of an intensely unpleasant experience, such as depression, they emphasize the I am aspect of the experience, not the depressed aspect. Even in a deep depression, even in the experience, I am depressed, the I am that I am shines brightly. It is not even necessary to turn away from the depression, to exchange it for a more positive emotion. All that is necessary is just to discern the I am that is shining, that is present behind the experience, but also shining in the experience. So the more deeply we go into that experience, when I say the more deeply we go into it, I don't mean to suggest that we are one thing and the experience of our essential being is another thing. It's just a limitation of language. The more deeply our being remains with itself, stays in itself, sinks into itself, the more clearly its qualities, if we can call them qualities, they are really the absence of qualities. But the absence of disturbance we call peace. The absence of the sense of lack we call happiness. So if I ascribe positive qualities to our essential being, please understand that what I am really describing is the absence of all the qualities that we usually attach to experience. Our essential being is free of all disturbance, and hence its nature is peace. It is free of the sense of lack, and hence its nature. So that may not seem to be a very direct answer to your question. But what I intend by this answer is to make it very clear to you that your recognition of your essential nature is not an extraordinary experience that happened 14 years ago. It is just a very simple, intimate, ever-present recognition of the essential, uncolored being prior to its coloring or conditioning by thought, feeling, activity, and relationship. And the recognition of that should not make your life any more difficult to lead. On the contrary, it should make your life easier. Your activities are no longer filtered through the neurotic fears and desires of a temporary finite self. Your relationships are no longer at the mercy of a separate self who is always seeking to fulfill itself through the acquisition of an object, an other, a state of mind. So this simple recognition, our essential being's recognition of itself in us, gradually clears up the way we think and feel, and subsequently the way we act and relate. If the recognition of the self is not an experience, you're right. The recognition of the self, its recognition of itself, is not an experience. It is only possible to experience something that is at an apparent distance from ourselves. For instance, it is only possible for the eyes to see something that is at a distance from them. Likewise, it is only possible to know something as an object that it is at a distance from the knower. Now, there is no distance from ourself to ourself, and therefore ourself cannot know itself as an object of experience. You can know the sound of my voice now, or the sight of this room, as an object of experience, because there seems to be one thing called you, the knower, and another thing called me, the speaker, or the room. But you, the knower, can never be an object of your own knowledge, because you are already too close to yourself to be able to know yourself as an object. The sun that illuminates is the sun that is illuminated. There is no distance from the sun to the sun, and therefore it cannot illuminate itself as an object in the same way that it can illuminate the moon. Likewise, our self cannot know itself as an object of experience because it is too close to itself to be able to separate itself from itself and turn around and say, there is myself as an object. In other words, the self's knowledge of itself, consciousness's knowledge of itself, is the only knowledge there is that does not take place in subject-object relationship. And it is, as such, an utterly unique knowledge that is different from and prior to any other knowledge or experience. In fact, it is the only knowledge that is not relative to the finite mind, and it is thus called absolute knowledge. It is the only absolute knowledge there is. That is the only knowledge there is that is not relative to or dependent upon the finite mind. It is in a different category of knowledge altogether, and it is thus called the absolute, or the absolute truth. our knowledge of ourself, the knowledge that shines in each of us as the experience I am, is consciousness's knowledge of itself. And I would suggest in religious language is God's knowledge of himself in us. In other words, I would suggest that the simple experience that each of us has, the knowledge I am, before the I am is colored or conditioned by experience, is God's presence shining in each of our hearts. But that presence cannot be known by anything other than itself. Just as the sun illuminates itself, so the self knows itself directly, not through subject-object relationship. As the 13th century Sufi mystic Balayani said, no one sees him except, please don't object to the use of the pronoun he. That was just the literary convention in 13th century. So no one sees him except himself. No one reaches him except himself. No one knows him except himself. He knows himself by himself. He reaches himself through himself alone. Only he knows him.
And now we will listen to my teacher Nome talk
If you know
about
yourself,
that shining, all shining.
you find that you are Brahman, the illimitable, indivisible Absolute. And it is Brahman alone that knows Brahman as such. This true self is of the nature of being, illimitable, unborn, imperishable, uncreated, unformed being. This true self is of the nature of illimitable, indivisible, immutable consciousness, inherent in which is the non-objective knowledge, the non-conceptual knowledge of itself. This true self is of the nature of innate bliss, uncaused, unconditioned, non-dependent, and utterly self-existent. Satchidananda, being, consciousness, bliss. 3 terms to describe one ineffable, indefinable reality. The very nature of existence itself, which is the Absolute, Brahman. The instruction in the Chandogya Upanishad is Tattvamasi, that you are. It signifies that that alone is what you are, and that that is entirely you. Apart from that real self, there is no other kind of self. And since it is non-objective and indivisible, it is not apart from you, as if there would be the self, and yourself you could know or not know it. Because of its very nature, And because knowledge of the self is the knowledge of reality, one should know one's own self. Who is it that should know oneself? Who is it that should realize the self, realize Brahman? It is for this purpose that the Maharshi's consistent instruction in self-knowledge was that one should inquire with an inquiry that is non-objective in character, that is, an inquiry into one's own nature. Who is it that exists? You exist, and you know that you exist. And this existence is invariable, and likewise its intrinsic knowledge of itself. What is the nature of this one? Yourself. Obviously, it cannot be the body, which is an objective appearance in one's experience. The one who knows the body, who knows about seeing and hearing and touching and smelling and tasting, cannot possibly be the body or the senses. Who is it? What's your own nature? The one who knows thought in all its various permutations, which we commonly call the mind. The unknown knower of all that is known, as is referred to in the Upanishads. Who is that? If we think in terms of myself, and there is another, the self, what is the definition of myself? Or at a lower level, if one thinks in terms of myself and there are other selves, what are the definitions of these selves? You will find they're a mirror image of the definition of yourself. What is the definition of yourself? If it's merely the body, then there's yourself and other selves. But can you be the body? If you are not the body, where are you located? And what is the significance of birth and death? Inquire within yourself, deeply. Who am I? To know your own nature. This is not a matter of mere thinking. Thought cannot capture, define, or reveal what you are. Every limitation which through imagination is superimposed upon your own nature is just as Sri Bhagavan mentioned, the thought of it. But you are not a thought. You are innately free from thought, transcendent of thought. Who is the knower? This cannot be studied as if it were a topic. You are not a topic. True knowledge is immediate experience. That is, it is not divided between subject and object. True knowledge is inherent in being. True knowledge is not a possession of anyone. It is neither gained nor lost. Just as being is neither gained nor lost, neither appears nor disappears. Likewise, real happiness or bliss is neither gained nor lost. For it is the very nature of what is within, and not something that comes and goes, as an occurrence or an event, or some objective thing. Therefore, Sri Ramana said, the only way to recover the bliss that was never actually lost is to know the being that you, or self, that you always really are. If you think there is something else, what is the definition of I? That this aspect of your experience will always correspond to the definition of the I. Between I and this plays out all the illusion of duality. To be free of the notions of I and this is to abide in the non-dual truth, Advaita. That is the final knowledge, Vedanta. To understand for yourself what is being indicated by the previous few minutes of prattle. Inquire within yourself. Know your own nature.
And now we will meditate for a little while. Breathe in and breathe out. Take long, slow breaths. Notice the breath as it comes in, as it goes out. Notice that you exist. You exist and you know that you exist. Now investigate within yourself. What is this existence? What exists? Is it sometimes more and sometimes less? Is there some time when you exist more? Is there some time where you don't exist as much? Does existence ever change? Who am I? All right. Let us close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you for letting me share this teaching with you. This series on Ramana's 40 verses on reality will continue in the following weeks. If this satsang was of interest to you, I have more: a free book site, a YouTube site, and my blog. The URLs will be on screen next.